Is this your only game today, or you're going?
No, I'm going to go to Lexington. So there's 4 teams I've not been able to see yet. I've seen 10 of the 14. I've not seen Tennessee in person, and I've not seen South Carolina and Kentucky. And then Ole Miss I'll hit next week, which see all 14 teams by week 7? That's pretty good work.
I'm always careful how I ask questions, but let's see what kind of answer I get.
Careful how I ask.
I know that. From where y'all were in January when y'all left Indianapolis to coming together on a deal to expand the playoff, were you surprised? I'm surprised is a good word, but how'd you feel about how quickly it came to pass, and would you have thought in January that it would?
In January, no, I would not have thought that. In fact, when we finished in January, my view was we were going back to square one, and I shared that perspective with my colleagues. We really didn't do much. We met in April, we met in June, and the presidents had said that they were going to ultimately make the decision. We knew they were meeting. Probably the first surprise was they had a video conference in mid-August, where the momentum was created. So when September 2nd came, I wasn't surprised then. I was surprised at more openness. Yet, when you think about all that happened this particular summer, it's not so surprising that perspective shifted the way they did.
Do you think that they moves from UCLA and USC sort of made everybody a little bit more willing to expand the playoff?
I'm likely not the person to analyze the shift among the 3 who opposed the playoff in January or did not support the playoff expansion. But that's certainly an event that is unique.
How do you feel about everyone expanded playoff? A lot of people moving forward, and I think obviously you support it. But you have a lot of teams that will be bowl eligible in your conference that will not make a playoff, and this seems to put the bowls on a little bit of shakier footing. How important is it to keep the bowl system alive in some form? How important is that, do you think?
I have checked in regularly with our athletics directors, really about the importance of bowl games. We continue to believe having the full type of roster that we have now will remain important. One of the points of continuing conversation or evaluation is the psychology around it, how patterns change. We've seen some of that with opt-outs. We've also seen, here you had a small number but passionate about playing football, and we want to continue to provide those opportunities and want to do it in a rewarding way, which I think we've done, but we're gonna pay attention as well as maybe thoughts change.
I know a couple of schools are against going to the 6-3 format. Kind of where are you all at with that in the league, and when would you like to have something finalized with kind of future scheduling?
We've not taken any votes, so people will voice opinions. That's always our reality. We are looking through our I'm going back to kind of the roster of issues, tiebreakers, understanding the CFP, which I would think in the next 60 days we'll have an understanding about early expansion or not. That's a thought in people's minds. We're still focused on 2025 entry for Texas and Oklahoma, but my Big 12 colleague during their media days talked about openness to early transition. So we have to just be nimble. We'll continue to look at models and see what opportunities that actually creates. I think this is a game that's a really good example of one of the needs to adapt so that we move our teams through our cities with greater frequency. Somebody would have to tell me, I remember the game, I don't remember the year, the last time Tennessee was here.
10,
yeah, so it's 12 years. That's our cycle. Georgia has not played in College Station yet. Those things need to happen with greater frequency. LSU needs to go to Knoxville with greater frequency. That's part of the scheduling conversation that to me is part of the numbers, but it's bigger than the numbers too.
Any thoughts on when the decision could be made on a new schedule format?
I think I probably said to you when we announced expansion first met, I asked our athletics director, because this is really about them managing their schedules, non-conference issues, and when would they like to know, and they said Destin in 2022, and so that's come and gone. So we're not going to put timelines per se, but I would expect us to make a decision in an efficient time frame, which means we're not going to go for years. We'll take this year to figure out what the atmosphere looks like. And if you back up, in Destin, when we stopped, we have some campus transition taking place, athletics directors, presidents. We wanted to see what happened with the CFP, and the thought then was the conversation will start and we'll have direction on 26, and obviously that changed greatly. We have another 16-team conference that will join our vision. So all those things have been really important opportunities for consideration, and who knows what might emerge.
Are you pleased with the direction that infractions and enforcement is heading? Having just seen the most recent things handed down, and do you have any thoughts on where the LSU case is?
I'll be pleased when we operate in such a way that we and the SEC don't have infractions cases. That's when I'll be pleased. That's the expectation. I'm not pleased that it takes years and years and years and years to bring these matters to conclusion, regardless of recent announcements and the effort to create a more timely process. I think some of those outputs through board of directors actions are helpful. I think bringing to conclusion the independent process, which has been announced after the current cases are through. But the NCAA has a responsibility to bring these issues to conclusion. That is the membership's trust being placed in the association's work, and that trust has to be fulfilled.
Do you think with NIL we're kind of seeing the last bit of these kinds of cases throughout the NCAA, or do you think it's something that could continue?
I doubt we're at a destination on name, image, and likeness issues. There are any number of potential cases. So we've seen announcements around COVID recruiting violations. I'll use that for an example. Like, if you couldn't understand during the COVID era not to have visits under the radar, that's an indication we're going to continue to have infractions matters, because human behavior being what it is, they're going to bump up against oversight. How name, image, and likeness is eventually structured will provide the answer to that question. I think there'll be infractions cases that may be different than they were 20 years ago, but again, human behavior being what it is, we're going to bump up against issues.
In retrospect of Tennessee's case, this is a different head coach, a different athletic director than what their infractions occurred under. In retrospect, did they do the right thing by sort of cleaning house in the way that they did?
In my view, yes. I think the campus leadership is critically important. In fact, you've seen the messaging from the Division I Board of Directors that speaks directly to the need to support the kind of leadership we've seen at the University of Tennessee. And I give a great deal of credit to Chancellor Plowman, to those around her. Those were difficult decisions, but also the transition to new leadership and the opportunity for a really bright future. With an emphasis on we can't have any more of these issues. The question, like, am I pleased with outcomes? I'll be pleased when we don't have inputs. And so I think that message is being delivered. Ron just showed up, so there's something coming from the back.
You were here early. You're ahead of time.
I had a professor that if I was on time, I was late. So
I blame her.
It's back to that engineering.
Tennessee, after its infractions, are pretty quickly competitive. This is the best Tennessee's been in a while. Is the league healthier if a historic power like Tennessee is competitive in this way?
I think when all of our powers are competitive, which is all 14, soon to be 16, we're healthy. The beauty of this conference is there's high expectations across the board, regardless of budget, regardless of stadium size. And the beauty of this league is anyone can compete. Yep, there are those who would be designated historic powers. I don't really look at it that way. I just look at the incredible competition. Columbia, Missouri last week. People probably were dismissive, right, of that competitive event. Yet you never know. Whenever you go into these games, it's on the line. And we hear that in like coach speak. But I think that's the beauty of this conference is the intense competition, the quality competitors, the outstanding coaching that produces, things that you would never have imagined. And that's exciting. It's also exciting when you feel momentum in different places and it rotates. Like I came in last night and the number of Joe Burrow jerseys I saw during my walk this morning and the paintings of that special season, that's there for a lot of people in this league.
Greg, I'm sorry if you've already addressed this, but is there a timetable on the 8 or 9 game scheduling model moving forward?
Yeah, I spoke of it. We're gonna continue to look at inputs. I think I shared earlier a lot of work right now on the ability or the inability for us to expand the playoff early. That's an important marker for us. Looking at some of our internal things, how do you break ties if you're in this single division structure? The number of games is absolutely a conversation, and I spoke to first time LSU's been here in 12 years as an example of my vision back in August of 2021, post-expansion when we first met, is let's take a step back, think broadly about our scheduling options, which we've done, but also think about how we can move teams through our campuses with greater frequency.
Are you surprised?
So we're still focused on those realities.
Okay. Are you surprised it's taken this long, or is it more of a fluid situation with the playoff and just kind of too many moving parts to where, like,
no,
I know it was talked about at Destin that it could be possible.
Yeah, no, we were poised was the word. So I'll hold myself accountable to my words because people do that. Like I've had when 3 years ago you said, I'm like, okay, so I said we were poised to make a decision. We were. We actually were going down the road and then we stopped to think through, and part of that's my role to introduce what else is out there. And I was asked, was I surprised about the action to expand the college football playoff when we did? I thought in Destin we'd have some insight into the willingness to expand for the 26th season, for example. And so that was a reason to wait a little bit. You've seen another conference move to 16 members like we announced a year earlier. All of that is helpful. There might be something else that takes place. And I don't want to be in the situation we were with when A&M and Missouri joined, which was within a 12-month cycle we were doing schedules. This week we set some formats for sports where we just manage our own championships, and we've been pretty deliberate in that preparation. So I look at that as using time wisely. I don't think it's a concern, it's not a surprise, and we're going to adjust. And I'll just, this may be your eyes roll back in your head part of the conversation. I learned a lot during COVID, and so I was pushed all the time. When are you going to make a decision? When are you going to make a decision? And we took as long as we possibly could, reasonably could, and it worked as well as you could in that dynamic. So I don't freak out about time structures, but we want to use time wisely. We don't just want to let it slip by.
If you go to the 3-6 model,
you guys were done like 10 minutes ago.
If you go to the 3-6 model, the 9-game conference, there's some obvious wins of who those 3 would be for a lot of schools, but do you go around the room and say who do you want, or how does that process work?
We've gone through a set of analytics, so we haven't made any decisions. Up front, we asked athletics directors. So this has been a really healthy process. When I talk about using time, we've conducted surveys, just asking about what points of evaluation our athletics directors use. We've then had a series of one-on-one conversations to follow up and clarify really values. And then we have to make decisions. But part of the values communicated was fairness and balance. Like everybody wants fairness and balance. Well, somebody tell me what that means. So we've had to establish what would be determined as fairness and balance, and part of that's rotating teams. You look at analytics over time of competitiveness, where do you place teams on schedules, and it's been an interesting learning process. So we're going to think through elements And we're not just going to rush to place teams, but ultimately we'll have to place teams in the permanent category, which some circumstances are obvious. That then eliminates options for other teams, and then you have to make decisions.
A lot of people talk about, NIL and recruiting. What about NIL with transfer portal? Because I mean, you see, these kids jumping from, a decent year at Pittsburgh, where they're the ACC champs, and going to Southern Cal to play this year. Do you feel like that's a real issue too?
Well, I don't separate incoming freshmen from transfers moving under. That's all under recruiting.
Okay.
And I'm always attentive. So he began the question with if, and you began with a lot of people. Those are like my confusing phrases. So we'll just kind of deal with the reality. We said from the beginning that name, image, and likeness shouldn't be a direct part of recruiting activity. And that's without regard to freshmen or enrolled students. That's not reality at this point. And I've had any number of conversations in the last few months as we think about congressional activity, just educating leaders about why that point of concern exists for us, that we're inducing players. And we need to think deeply about whether that's truly college athletics. It's always been out there in different ways, from infractions cases I was asked about, but there's been accountability. And part of the concern now is with state laws, I'm unaware of any state enforcement activity around the laws that states have adopted. And if that in fact is the case, then we really don't have a structure, and we need to have a structure for competition around this name, image, and likeness activity.
Do you feel like with the NIL and transfer portal, it's kind of like the playoff? You got to start somewhere. There's a ground zero. And then you tweak it as you go along. You had to have it, but you got to tweak it now as it goes along.
The onset of name, image, and likeness activity was not well thought out nor implemented in an orderly fashion. It was done on a state by state basis, individual states with no coordination. That indicated there always would be adaptation. Now, the adaptation we've seen is states with pretty healthy laws originally adopted pulling back to no regulation. Ron, the answer is yes. That reality says we have to continue to adapt. The reason that the congressional conversation is a reality is that is a venue, perhaps the venue, where you can adopt a national standard. As we're playing national schedules, national championships, that is why we need a national standard. We also, to your question about recruiting, we're asking 17-year-olds to evaluate 10 or 15 different state laws as they're being approached in recruiting. That's not even remotely fair to young people and their families. We should be able to conduct our matters in a better way than that. And I won't go through all of the talking points, but those are two that rise to the top. One is it's not been a well thought out, orderly transition. Really three, we need a national standard for national competition. And then the third being, we're asking people to figure out different state laws, which seems enormously problematic to ask of young people at a key decision-making point in their life.
How much does this put a strain on compliance people at institutions and the SEC as far as